Spectre was one of the most anticipated movies of all time for me. Having previously seen the excellence of Skyfall, my expectations, as well as most, were very high for this film. When I first heard developments of Spectre, it was rumored that Christopher Nolan would take over the franchise, and I was immediately invested because of how amazing he is at directing, well, anything. However, when it was revealed that Nolan declined in order to direct Interstellar, production of the film halted, and instead of the film being released in 2014, it wouldn't be until late 2015 until I could see it. On top of all that, it was discovered the production was stuck in development hell due to a lack of a good script, and when the film leaked in late 2014, it had to be nearly rewritten. Nonetheless, fans everywhere were still incredibly excited to see another film about the world's greatest fictional spy, myself included. Now, before we go very deep, because this will be a deep analysis, I must say that I am incredibly mixed with this film. There are many things to like, yet there are so many to dislike. So let's get started. So our film opens with, ironically, one of the best tracking shots I've ever seen, and one of the top 5 best Bond film openings for sure. Unfortunately, that's the best I can say about it. The Day of the Dead ceremony is in full effect, and we see Bond and some woman enter her room, and we think we know where this is going because we've seen a lot of Bond films. Yet he has another agenda.
Where are you going?
I won't be long.
He goes outside and the shot just continues, even though there's a visible cut, as he mounts his gun at someone he was after and eventually shoots the bomb that blows up the building that should have blown up Mexico for some reason. Then this happens. Awesome stuff, right? Yeah, that's what I was thinking when I saw it. Well, then this happened. Yeah, I actually thought it was quite comical the first time seeing it, but upon further thought, it just felt like an awkward gag, one of the many in this film, unfortunately. He ends up chasing the same man to his helicopter, leading to a brilliant fight, one of the best fight scenes I've ever seen in a Bond film, because the suspense is right there and it is so amazing to watch. I can remember sitting in the cinema thinking to myself, the critics who reviewed this were just total dicks, and how can this be an average movie from the consensus of Rotten Tomatoes? Then I saw the rest of it. I feel sad to say that this is easily the best part of the entire movie. When you start out with the best moment or scene in your film, the rest of it will feel very subpar. For this analysis, I know I have a ton to discuss about what I disliked about the film, but let me start by saying what I did like because there is still a lot to like here. Number 1, the opening scene. This is basically the scene everybody loved. It's an opening action scene that is really suspenseful, has a brilliant opening shot, even though there are at least 2 cuts in it, but it leads to an awesome building collapse and an excellent helicopter fight, which really is one of the best openings in Bond history. Number 2, the introduction to Hinks and Oberhauser. The introduction to Mr. Hinks was perfect. He walked in, gouged a man's eyeballs out without saying a single word, making him not only a badass, but the first big guy Daniel Craig's version of Bond would be up against. Following this is the introduction to Oberhauser, which is honestly some of the best shadowy camera work I've seen in a Bond film. When he's finally revealed, he says one word to Bond.
Cuckoo.
This is fantastic writing because with one word, we know that not only is this the bad guy, but Bond may have some kind of connection to this man. Number 3, the train fight. Dear Lord, this is amazing. I said it in my review for the film, and I'll say it right here. The fight between Bond and Hanks on the train is simply the best fight scene ever on a train. I like that it tributes Craig's favorite Bond film, From Russia with Love, featuring a great train fight as well. It was an absolute pleasure to finally see a big guy intimidate Craig's version of Bond. Number 4, Daniel Craig as James Bond. Now, I understand there is some controversy going on to whether or not Daniel Craig will sign on to do another Bond film because he said, and I clearly am stating this, he would rather slash his wrist than play the character again. That's really sad, because I believe Craig has solidified himself as being the second best Bond we've ever had, and for the most part was the most doubtful Bond for me. With movies like Casino Royale and Quantum of Who Gives a Shit, I wasn't sure if he was the right person as Bond. He's about 4 inches shorter than the true height of James Bond, which is 6'2", and was just too brutal in those 2 films. However, Skyfall was the film that made me start to care about him a little bit more, and I think Spectre may actually be his best performance as the character, even though he kind of looks a little bored during the film. I still think that he pulls off a very solid performance as 007. Number 5, and this is special, Monica Bellucci. Any straight guy loves Monica Bellucci, absolutely. It's just a shame her role is so small. Nonetheless, we still got to see an amazingly beautiful woman for a scene with masterful camera work, and she is just terrific in that scene, and I just love Monica Bellucci. Number 6, the nods to the classics. Even though Skyfall had some great nods, Spectre, in my opinion, creates more of them, and some of them are really clever and harder to spot. One of the hardest ones that I noticed upon my first viewing of the film is the scene where Bond makes out with Bellucci. Now, I will admit, I really wish I was Daniel Craig in this scene, and I'm pretty sure most of you can understand why. In this scene, though, it ends up with him putting his arms on the mirror over her, with the reflected glass. This is a nod to the very underrated Thunderball, where Bond ends up with a woman in the shower, and he puts his hands on the reflected glass over her, just mirroring this very shot in Spectre. Number 7, Q in the action. What I really enjoyed about Spectre is that we finally got to see Q outside of the office, outside of giving Bond just gadgets. He tries to end up going to help him, like Benji in Rogue Nation, deliberate link there, and that will not be the last time I'll mention Rogue Nation, but I thought it was very cool how Q was able to now be in the field for a moment of the film. It just gave him some more weight. And number 8, the camera work. I honestly believe this is a beautifully shot film, and the second most beautifully shot film, second only to Skyfall, with incredible focus in shadows that really was amazing. The cinematography in this film is near stellar. It has a sleek tint, and for the first act, still has some of the mysterious tones that Skyfall did, which I thought was terrific and very well handled. Everything else in this film is just missed opportunities. Notice, none of the things I liked contained the word script, because the so-called script was written by a 10-year-old and just felt half-assed. So let's get the tech subplot out of the way first so that I don't have to mention it until the end of this video. MI6 is merging with MI5, which is known as the Joint Intelligence Service, which I will now refer to as the JIS throughout the entire video because I feel no need to just pronounce it. Anyway, there's a man named C who feels the 00 program is dead and prefers drone surveillance instead of agents in the field to M's dislike. I feel as though this resembles another spy movie that came out in the same year. What would that be? This plays throughout the entire film and was absurdly predictable that C was working for Blofeld. I mean, it was obvious. And what's worse is that this subplot is so underdeveloped. It feels like something that was shoehorned in at the last minute in order to accompany Blofeld's master plan, or so-called master plan. It made the pacing of the film even slower and doesn't really connect well at all. After the Mexico scene, Bond is taken off duty by M and is soon visited by Moneypenny, who they reduce to the behind-the-desk woman once again, where in the previous movie she was a badass. Bond then tries to explain to her why he went to Mexico, and apparently Bond got a so-called tape from M, who knew about Ciara before the events of Skyfall, who tells Bond to find him, eliminate him, and attend his funeral in Rome, who didn't decide to send him on that mission because it wasn't planned before Skyfall was written.
If anything happens to me, 007, I need you to do something. Find a man called Marco Sciarra. Kill him. And don't miss the funeral.
This is the problem with the writing. It's just another example of how something so random conveniently gives our protagonist a clue. Initially, being shrouded by secrecy is great, but there comes a time where you just want the film to get to the point. Spectre does it so much to the point of absurdity. I firmly believe each scene starts out with something somewhat interesting, but the script just can't seem to find its footing, tone, or coherence.
Well, it's all a matter of perspective.
So she gives Bond a box recovered from Skyfall because why the hell not? They just want to say Skyfall because it's a much better film. He stares at a picture of a boy, which I'm pretty sure is himself, and a man who was some father figure and one face burnt out. How convenient! If it wasn't burnt out, we wouldn't have known it was obviously Blofeld, or for the film's sake and screenwriter's sake, Franz Oberhauser. Now we come to a scene that joyfully tributes the classics with Bond meeting Q and immediately touching his weapons or whatever's on display. Personally, I think this scene was a great tribute to Bond films, but then, right after that, Q gives him the cliched car and gadgets. But he tells him that the new Aston Martin DB10 was for 009. But anyone who's seen a Bond film in their life knows he's gonna steal it. Of course he's gonna take it, because it's James Bond. Q also injects something into Bond called Smart Blood, which allows him to be tracked at any point in the globe. Kinda sounds like what they gave him in Casino Royale. As Bond heads for Rome to attend the funeral, he meets widow Lucia Ciara, played by the mother I'd like to Monica Bellucci. Many complain that this scene didn't need to be in the film, but I actually disagree. This scene involves Monica Bellucci knowing the 007 killed her husband, only for him to be able to seduce her, have sex with her, and get the information he needs. Nonetheless, Bond heads to the organization that we all know as Spectre if you've ever seen a Bond film in your life, and he uses a good old nickname that Harrison Ford used in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade.
Chi sei?
Sono Topolino. E tu chi saresti?
Chiedo scusa.
But surprisingly, there was a lot of good to be had with this scene. For one, it was filmed and edited to beautiful results. Now, the introduction to Christoph Waltz was absolutely amazing in every single regard. However, his relationship with Bond is just... We'll get to that later. So Bond gets into his car and drives away, only to be pursued by Mr. Hinks. Now, you'd think this action scene would be pretty damn awesome, right? No. Rome is completely empty throughout the entire chase, making it feel weightless, cliched, and just god-awful. This is a terrible chase scene because there's absolutely no tension to it. This is one of Spectre's biggest issues, the action scenes. True, they are cool as hell to look at, but they're just there to be action sequences. There's barely any tension. This is something Skyfall succeeded in wholeheartedly. The action scenes had tension because Bond returned, but he was a very vulnerable man throughout the film. And there were genuine moments of concern for him because he failed his test needed to continue in the field. However, in Spectre, the action scenes are just there to be action scenes to show spectacle and have no real purpose to the plot, which is so jumbled, making them even more forgettable. Hilariously, while all this happens, Moneypenny, doing her so-called behind-the-scenes work, informs Bond about who the Pale King is. How convenient, once again. So Bond, saying,
Of course, Mr. White.
goes to find Mr. White from Casino Royale and Quantum of Who Gives a Shit at a remote place where we find out he's dying from something called thallium cancer. A cancer of which he is slowly dying of, instead of Spectre just killing him, but they won't because Bond needs to find him because the script. Of course. Once again, how convenient. Anyways, he tells Bond he has a daughter and knows she'll be in danger, so Bond vows a man he shot in the f***ing kneecap when his only love Vesper died that he will protect her. Are you f***ing kidding me? Now, the ending of this scene is actually very well handled, but when it's recalled later on in the film, it doesn't hit the emotional note I believe the writers thought it would. Following this, Bond finds her in a clinic in the Alps, where she asks him many questions we don't really care about and just want him to get to the point. Now, what I liked was that we actually got to see Q doing more than just tech work in an office. Like Benji, Rogue Nation, once again deliberate link there and it won't stop. Now, two good jokes happen in this scene. When Bond asks his usual drink, vodka martini, shaken not stirred, to the bartender, he responds that it serves non-alcoholic beverages.
Can I get you something, sir?
Vodka martini, shaken, not stirred.
I'm sorry, we don't serve alcohol.
The second comical thing happens when Bond fights a man. He tries to get up, and he sticks his hand out and says, stay, like he's a dog.
No, stay.
And what do you know? Madeline Swan gets captured and becomes a damsel in distress. Of course. This is the first, and not last time, I will repeat those exact same words. So Bond tries to rescue her in an action scene that actually wasn't all that awesome. It's insanely forgettable because there have been so many plane fights in Bond movies, this just felt like another one. It just felt so cliched. So after the wings of the plane broke and a massive collision ensues, Bond is still alive. You know, it's kind of like the Fast and Furious movies where the protagonists never seem to get hurt. And once again, I like the fact how the previous three films showed Bond as a true person, someone who could really be hurt, someone who was absolutely vulnerable. In this cliched, okay film, he is always on top of things. Now, before I continue, let's discuss the character of Dr. Madeline Swan, played by French-Italian actress Léa Seydoux. I'd like to make a disclaimer before I voice my personal opinion. Many people believe she is one of the best Bond girls ever, one of the strongest Bond girls ever, and one of the most interesting Bond girls ever. Do I think the same way? Well, I have 3 words. Oh, hell no. I absolutely hated her character. From the moment she appeared on screen, I knew this was going nowhere really very fast. She does nothing throughout the entirety of this film. Nothing that shows that she is a badass. Nothing that shows that she is just an awesome character. Because she's always getting captured every other scene. It is utterly ridiculous how people think she is a very strong female character because there's nothing in this movie that shows me that she is incredibly strong. She has one moment with a gun, and she has one moment with stabbing a guy with a pen. That's it. She is always getting captured, always being the damsel in distress, very, very cliched. There's nothing she does that's strong, there's nothing that's really appealing about her character, and she has one of the worst character arcs I have ever seen in my entire life. But we'll get to that in a minute. I need to discuss something else. They regroup with Q with a scene filled with just your average typical exposition where Swan reveals the name of the organization as Spectre. You think?
Spectre. Its name is Spectre.
As well as explaining La American is actually a hotel.
It's not a person. It's a place.
Then they just get there. No transitional scene, just them, cut to the next shot, they're already there. But hey, this is a James Bond film. I bet the screenwriters are wondering just how many places they could go to shoot this film. Back with another bullshit JIS scene. C explains to M that the 00 program is to be terminated in favor of the Nine Eyes project. But more on that when I explain Blofeld's bullshit plan. Back with Bond, Madeline remains the good woman she is by not accepting his charms and tells him to stay away from her, which actually made her character just in the slightest bit interesting. Hours later, after she's drunk off her ass, Bond discovers our little mouse ex machina as it goes through a little hole in the wall. Bond smashes into it, conveniently revealing another room that is yet to be conveniently discovered by anyone that is conveniently chock full of ex machinas. How convenient, you may ask. In the room, as Bond is discovering various tapes from Mr. White, all of a sudden Madeline finds something which is conveniently the next clue. Once again, it's just a random convenience for story's sake, and it's not the last one. Next we come to the train scene. For about 95% of the initial scene, I was really into it, as it delivers more development for Swan. Even though I dislike Madeline as a character, I enjoyed her conversation with Bond regarding whether or not she could handle weapons, and shows that she can handle herself. It's just a shame that she uses a gun only once. Next we come to the infamous train fight, which you know I love at this point. It's just great to see a big guy intimidate Craig's version of Bond by throwing him through walls like they're made of paper. However, this scene makes no sense in the long run, but I will definitely explain it to you in firm detail very soon. So as you know, Hanks brutally beats up Bond, and I remember sitting in the theater just feeling bad for 007. Because I've loved this character for 23 movies, and now he's been beaten within an inch of his life. It felt really intense, and the scene really worked for me. And I love the way Hanks dies saying his one and only word,
Shit.
However, everything is destroyed with Madeline by this line.
What do we do now?
The next scene is a Bond making out with her, and this is where I knew it was going nowhere, and I actually felt very disgusted. And I know many were taken aback when Bond seduces Monica Bellucci, but this one was just so weird and so out of left field for me. This is quite simply why I hated her character. Her arc is one of the worst arcs for a female character I have ever seen in an action film, and it just diminished her somewhat interesting persona. It's terrible shit writing that had absolutely no place in this film. This just makes her another underdeveloped sex object because it's a James Bond movie, and hey, they can probably get away with it. I'll get to the whole it's a James Bond movie at the end of this video. You can guarantee that. Then they receive an Uber of a ride to the Spectre facility, which is a giant crater similar to Blofeld's lair in the film You Only Live Twice. They go inside where they find a little meteor, and they get introduced to Oberhauser, who hasn't been in the film for like an hour. Remember how I said the movie started to slightly become worse after the meeting? Well, this is where it becomes a flat-out mess with a few plot holes, as well as the pacing becoming so goddamn slow. Oberhauser, which you already know is Blofeld because it's just so obvious, enters with a pretty good shadowy shot actually. He shows them around his facility and reveals to Bond that he's been the mastermind of his sufferings, and here's where it all goes to hell. They go into this room where a bunch of people are checking CCTV or something, who really cares? And Blofeld lays out his master scheme, which now corresponds to C as he was working for Blofeld the whole time. Like that wasn't predictable at all. See what I'm getting at? This entire film is just so predictable, scene to scene to scene, that you become amazed people wrote this shit and thought it wouldn't be. It's mind-blowing. What's even worse is that their scheme wasn't all that evil or threatening. It was actually very generic and cliched, as is the entire movie. It was simply to take over the surveillance technology, which just feels so generic. It becomes serious when Blofeld ends up showing Madeline and Bond the video feed that he just so happened to have in Mr. White's home, of Mr. White killing himself and Bond sliding his gun over. Then Bond gets knocked out very swiftly. When he wakes, it's all blurry, and then he finally sees a white cat on the floor, indicating that this is obviously Blofeld. Now I understand if you are new to this franchise, it probably wouldn't make that much sense to you, but anyone who's seen a classic Bond film in their life should know this at this point, hopefully. And what do you know, Bond is strapped to a torture chair, just like Goldfinger. I get it's a nod to it, but it's just so formulaic. We've seen it so many times. We're so past that. Now, the next scene in this film made me so angry in the theater that I literally wanted to scream, as we finally know what Blofeld's motivation is for hating 007. He explains to Madeline, with an exposition scene, that Bond was his stepbrother and that his dad got close to him. What? Are you f***ing kidding me? Who the hell thought that was a good motivation or good backstory? This man becomes an international terrorist and the head of the most dangerous criminal organization in Bond history because of jealousy? That is one of the worst villainous motivations I have ever heard, and it completely gave this movie a kick to its literal cinematic balls. I mean, Christoph Waltz is a two-time Oscar-winning actor, for Christ's sake, and a brilliant actor. You know what, guys? I really wish that I was a fly on the wall when this scene was pitched, and whoever wrote this particular motivation said, you know what, here's this idea, and everyone just happened to agree with it. If I was that boss, I would walk up to that person, ask them, oh, so you wrote this? You wrote this in your mind, and you thought it was original, and you thought it was good, and you thought it was a solid motivation? I would have slapped that asshole in the face and said, you are fired, because that is one of the worst scripted things I have ever seen in my life. It's one of the worst action villains ever concocted, for Christ's sake. And he's supposed to be the head of the biggest organization that Bond goes up against, Spectre. That's what this movie's about. And our motivation is for jealousy. The second issue is now the train fight. I promised I'd bring this up because it makes no sense when you really think about it. Dave Bautista fights Craig with the ultimate intention to kill him. The entire fight, he's throwing him through walls trying to kill him, and he almost pushes him off the train. However, Blofeld's plan was to have Bond come to his lair so he could drill him with that machine he invented. So why was he trying to kill him? The entire scene is ruined because it makes no logical sense. If it was revealed that Mr. Hinks was working for himself, and was just masquerading as a henchman for Oberhauser, maybe I would have bought it. But the fact that he dies too quickly, we don't get any answers. And let me just say this. If Mr. Hinks actually died on that train, I'll be very disappointed. He needs to return in the next one if Craig is still in it. I mean, Jaws got kicked off the train in Spire Love Me and returned in Moonraker, so I wouldn't see why Mr. Hinks couldn't make it again. Okay, so now we come to the torture scene where Blofeld decides to drill holes in Bond's head. And this scene was actually very intense seeing it in the theaters, and I think everyone was nearly shocked when they saw this. Now, I understand that the filmmakers were trying to make this a very serious scene, but the fact that this entire film is just so tonally inconsistent, you don't know whether to take this seriously or not, because you're thinking to yourself, yes, we know Bond is going to survive, but at the same time, he's getting his head drilled. But all of it is undone when Madeline just gets up from her chair, and once again, she's just the damsel in distress. The second time, and not the last time. She comes up to him and she says,
I love you.
why? Just why? This makes no sense. You met the man 2 fucking days ago. This isn't Titanic. You're not a teenager. Honestly, her character has like 10 minutes of screen time with Bond. So there's no way you're just gonna believe it. It's just unbelievable. They tried to create this weird romantic story in it, but it just didn't work because you don't really care about her character that much. So of course Madeline takes the watch from Bond and throws it at the computer, which blows up Blofeld, of course giving him his iconic scar, which I'm pretty sure we all knew was going to happen. And what's sad is that Bond destroys the base really, really easily. Just watch. However, there is an incredibly amazing explosion that happens, which actually broke the Guinness World Records. So as Blofeld's complex just completely blows up, I have one question to ask. How does Blofeld make it out? It's never explained. But of course, it's convenience for story's sake that he's going to show up at the end of the film just to mess with Bond before he eventually tries to kill him and fails once again because it's so cliched. One thing I didn't notice upon first viewing was when the plane was up in the air, 2 cars are actually seen escaping the complex as well. That's the only possibility for how Blofeld could have escaped. However, it's also quite possible that other agents of Spectre were in those 2 cars, which could be the new villains in future Bond films. That's all the good I can say about the rest of this film, because the last 30 minutes of this movie is some of the most boring sequences of an action film I've ever seen. They wanted to get through this as quickly as possible, so they literally drew detailed arrows pointing 007 to wherever he needs to go. However, before this, Bond is able to reunite with his team, but before they can leave, Madeline says she can't go with him and just leaves? Then what do you know? She gets captured and becomes a damsel in distress. Of course. So of course, as we know, Bond gets in a car crash and gets taken away, but he's able to take out the two guys very, very easily. As this happens, M, Moneypenny, and Q head over to Battle C, and it just feels like it doesn't need to be there. Something I liked in this scene is the imagery and the use of wires that look like webs, as it creates a very strong metaphor of Spectre and how Bond is literally trapped in their web. Following this, Bond enters a corridor and notices the faces of all the previous villains who worked under Spectre, as well as Vesper, and eventually finds Blofeld behind a glass where he reveals his iconic scar. Notice that when Bond shoots the glass crack appears to look like an octopus, basically the symbolism for the film. He tells Bond he has 3 minutes to find Madeline and get her out, or get himself out and live with the pain. The problem is, we don't see Madeline until Bond finds her, eliminating the true peril of the situation. Now, with a surprise twist, I guess, Blofeld blows up the entire MI6 building, and M just stands there thinking to himself, wow, this is really bad, as Bond and Madeline escape on the speedboat just before it collapses. Then this comes to a speedboat chase that is kind of similar to The World Is Not Enough in a way, and Bond shoots at the plane with his pistol and takes it out really, really easily. It was so easy to do this. It's like anyone with a gun can take out a plane that easily. Now comes the great climactic moment, where Bond takes out the baddie, but no, he doesn't. He instead points the gun at Blofeld's head, and Blofeld's telling him to do it. Come on, shoot me, do it. But it doesn't, because he says,
I've got something better to do.
I literally wanted to scream in the theater because I just can't believe 007 would do that. The last scene takes place in Q's office as Bond drops him a little visit to give him another Aston Martin car. That's a cool throwback and all, but it's all ruined with Madeline being with him as they drive off into the fictional sunlight. And that's the movie. Okay, it's time to wrap all this up. Spectre was an incredible disappointment from every single point I've shared with you guys. One aspect I've repeatedly mentioned in this video is how similar this film is to Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, or MI5. Even though productions for each film happen at the same time, it is very striking how both feature an agent from a different organization who wants to eliminate the hero's organization of specialized agents in favor of tech and surveillance. Because satellite technology is in full effect, the teams in both films only have each other to carry on with the mission as rogue agents. Now, I am going to make a connection to another film from 2015 that may strike some as strange or out of left field when I'm mentioning this. However, Spectre has received the same criticism as Star Wars The Force Awakens. Both have received criticism for coming off as very formulaic, like, we've seen it before, this is the same thing as the originals, it's the same tired retread over and over again. Hilariously, they both followed a similar trend to get where they were. They had 3 previous films that went away from the usual formula the series is best known for and what it's most loved for. However, the fans of the original series wanted it to return to what they loved, and we received a 4th film, or in which case a new film, that was disliked by many as feeling like a retread, like we've seen it before. Here's the difference though. One film was vastly better than the other one. And finally, let's discuss the whole it's a James Bond movie thing, because it's so apparent in this film. Now you guys must understand, I love the James Bond films. Here's my 50th collection of the series, and here's my book on the James Bond archives. So I know a lot of stuff about Bond. And throughout the first 20 films of the series, they all followed a similar formula. Bond walks in a white room, faces the camera, and fires his signature Walter PPK at it. It features beautiful, sexy girls, cars, action spectacle, vast, wonderful locations, and an awesome villain with insane plots for world domination, or control of some resource, or radiating gold, or melting the polar ice caps. I'm looking at you, Die Another Day. Why? With Casino Royale, Quantum of Who Gives a Shit, and Skyfall, these are 3 Bond films that felt very different, as they didn't feature the famous gun barrel sequences, action that actually enhanced the plot, yes, even Quantum, and the exploration of Bond as a person who is very vulnerable. In Spectre, there was once again the gun barrel sequence, and action that's only there to present spectacle. The problem is, it feels way too similar to what we've seen 20 times already, but it does it in a bad way since there wasn't really anything new added to it. Even the musical score in this film is almost the exact same score used in Skyfall, just with a few octaves and chords changed. It's an absolute shame that I am saying that Spectre isn't really a good movie because it has some very good aspects in it that can make for an enjoyable experience. However, it just doesn't have the weight that Skyfall or Casino Royale had to make it a very strong entry in the long-running franchise that I love. This just felt like it's a movie that's just there. It just feels like it's just an addition that doesn't really add anything special to it. It makes me begin to think that the series may be starting to run out of steam. Bond 25 is coming next year, and I hope it will resolve the glaring issues that this movie had. Now, I know there are many rumors speculating on what Bond 25 is going to be about, but I wonder if it will be like Our Majesty's Secret Service ending, where Madeline could die in the beginning, to which that would actually be great. And not just because I dislike her character, but I feel like this would be great for the character of Bond because we can now see him go on a personal revenge for Blofeld. It's just so stupid why he wouldn't shoot the one guy who was responsible for Vesper's death, is the leader of the most powerful organization Bond has ever been against, and I just don't understand why he wouldn't shoot him. It made no sense. In the end, however, if you watch this film just for pure entertainment, you may enjoy yourself, but don't go into it thinking it will change anything, because Spectre really just didn't add anything special or new to this franchise. I hope you guys really enjoyed this analysis video. I had a ton of fun making it, and I really hope that it will help you guys see this movie a little bit differently. Maybe you guys may have different opinions, and that's cool. If you like this movie, that is absolutely fine. I have no problem with it. Just leave me some comments below saying what you thought about this analysis, and I really thank you guys for supporting me. And if you like this, subscribe for more. Thank you guys for watching, and stay tuned.